Ben Horney with Front Office Sports here, and I am joined by Jay Williams, ESPN basketball analyst, former pro basketball player. And there's a lot to get into, so I'm just going to dive right into it. Thanks for joining us. Night one of the NBA draft was last night. You were there. What was the biggest surprise that happened last night?
Well, I think the last several days have been pretty incredible. Obviously, you're coming off the NBA Finals where the Knicks have won a championship for the first time in 53 years. So, New York City, the place I'm in right now, is absolutely booming. And then off the heels of that, you have the Boston Celtics, Miami Heat, arms race for Giannis, who's in Milwaukee. So, watching that unfold and watching Giannis then go to Miami, and the byproduct of that effect and what happens now with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum obviously was one of the talks of the evening. And if Jason Tatum, was going to be traded, and then a place like Atlanta, who had the eighth pick, if they were going to take that pick and then use that as an asset to trade, even though that didn't happen. So I think there's a lot happening around the NBA draft, inside of the draft itself, and I think it pretty much went according to order in my brain. AJ DeBonson, number one, Darren Peterson, obviously a controversial figure. I think I came to the conclusion, I think, frankly, he maybe has the most upside out of anybody in the draft, talking to CJ McCollum and some other people that have been around his camp since high school. And then I think, there are two teams that continue to put their chokehold on the league. And I think that's San Antonio, and I think that's OKC. OKC getting a guy named Adai Mara, who, is a 7-footer, 7'3" wingspan from Michigan. Michigan had three guys that went in the lottery, and now Dusty May, their head coach, a national champion, is the head coach of the Dallas Mavericks alongside Masai Ujiri. So, Adai playing for, OKC, and obviously they need depth in order to beat a guy like Wemby, who they struggled against with Chet Holmgren and Isaiah Hartenstein. Now they add depth. A guy like Bennett Sturts, who can shoot the heck out of the ball from Iowa, adds depth from a shooting guard perspective alongside Jarrett McCain, and obviously, a lot of the players that they have, and SGA and J Dubs and company. So, and then obviously San Antonio with a guy like Terrace Reed for UConn. We've always talked about Wemby having a bully behind him, somebody that's more of an enforcer. And I think they get that now with Terrace Reed. And they also get a guy named Jaden Quaidance that played at Arizona State 2 years ago, played at Kentucky this year. But 2 years ago, he would have been top 5 pick in the NBA draft, had some injuries that kind of kept him a little bit later in the draft. But I think both those two teams in the Western Conference got more powerful with their depth and talent that they provided to their already pre-existing power they have in that conference.
Yeah, it's obviously always hard to project how these rookies are going to perform once they make it into the league. But to your point, Spurs and OKC have some guys that might be impact players. And when you join a winning team, that impact can be immediate. So you mentioned a couple things that I want to get to as well there. But first, I do need to ask, there was this viral moment between you, Richard Jefferson, and Kenny Smith, where it kind of seemed like playful ribbing about you. But the internet has, as it does, given this some life, and there's been some hubbub about it on the internet about whether there was real tension. Was there any real tension there on set, or was it no harm, no foul?
No, there was no real tension, but it was awkward. It was awkward for me, being fully transparent with you, because a lot of times in my brain I'm extremely competitive, and I there are a lot of things that sometimes when you're on TV, naturally TV is becoming more like a podcast. But I think, saying things to millions of people, there are byproducts that happen. There are effects of that, a ripple effect. And, I focus a lot the last 25 years of my life, not on what happened, but what I've done with that. It's about what you do after something like that happens, and
Yeah.
similar mentality you have in sports. So for me, it was extremely uncomfortable. I've known RJ. Obviously, our history dates all the way back to playing against each other in the 2001 national championship. Him and I are cool people. I think sometimes ribbing can go a little bit too far. People were comparing it to the Kevin Hart roast. But for me, things like that sometimes happen on TV. You deal with it in real time. I tried to stay above it, frankly. I didn't want to get back into the jousting back and forth. One of the things I hated about the moment is that, a lot of times things get said and it becomes a viral moment, But I don't like when the viral moment becomes about me when I'm there talking about these young people where the moment was about them, you know? And
Yes.
when I get people from the crowd that are people I care about that are getting drafted in their families and they're reaching out to me asking me if I'm okay, I'm like, no, it's not about me. It's about you. This is your night. So look, I've lived with my accident for 20, 25 years now. People typically use it to try to diminish what I've been able to accomplish. For me, frankly, I think it speaks volumes about what I have been able to accomplish. So life happens. RJ and I'm sure, same with Kenny and Kevin. We'll talk about it. We'll learn from it. We'll move on. And welcome to TV. It happened.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that insight. And it kind of gets into my next question for you, what you said, which is like the draft is about the young incoming rookies. There were other social clips of you mixing it up with some of those guys and, having fun and whatnot. What's like one piece of advice that you find yourself giving to some of these guys as they're entering the league?
Well, first off, but I really appreciate you going there, man. Like business and sports and life, it's murky. It's all gray, right? And I think seeing a guy like AJ, understanding the relationship he has with his father, there are so many times throughout doing the draft. I've been around the league obviously since I've been 20 years old. Now being 45, it's you meet a lot of parents that put themselves in position of representation that should not be in that position because of the opportunity. And it's hard to talk to parents sometimes because they're so close to the sun. It's meaningful. And how you onboard a parent in that representation mode as a CEO or CMO of your company, whether they're on salary, which is a lot of conversations we have with young athletes about how they can put their parents on salary and how that could be a tax write-off. It's a very challenging, delicate area. But when I see Ace and then I see AJ, the way they hold themselves to see it culminate to this moment, and there are a lot of other parents that have held themselves to a higher standard when it comes to working with their child, has been mind-blowing. And and same with Darren. He's obviously gone through a lot this year at Kansas. I think it's a little bit of the problem with the league's rule about going to college or going to having that gap year before you're allowed to go into the NBA and being a certain age. That there are certain subset of individuals that frankly should go directly to the NBA. And just off the Darren Peterson clip, man, it's my sophomore year when I started to become a guy that people started talking about being the number one pick in the draft. I can't tell you how many times I checked out mock draft sites. And when my performance would dip, I would start to be stressful. I would gain anxiety, right? You're talking about millions of dollars being left on the table from being one as opposed to being five. And if I had had a team around me, an agent, a marketing person, a social media team, and then my parents that are trying to learn the business of sport, I don't know how I would have handled being managed, also dealing with my head coach at the same time, also dealing with the system, and then also dealing with an injury that I never had before. And now I'm forced to be playing in a system that maybe doesn't utilize my strengths to the best of its degree. And now I'm being criticized every single day on TV that I don't care about the game that I've shown the track record of loving for the past 15, 16 years. Right now, all of a sudden it's being in question. So I think there are a new subset of challenges around a lot of individuals to stay in managing media, managing, how they're portrayed publicly and privately, and then how that can affect your draft status. And it's not easy to navigate all that. So I think always trying to see who they are, see how they represent themselves, and then see how open and honest they are about their struggle. From somebody who's been open and honest about their struggle gives you a chance to better articulate that when you have the platform that I do.
Well, it's to your point. These younger players, it's everything has changed so much, even since your day. I always say it has gone from the athlete endorser to the athlete investor, and I feel like people as young as 18 years old, there's an expectation that they're a businessman now, so they need that team around them, and that is a segue into the next kind of topic that I wanted to talk to you about. We cover the business of sports. Obviously you're on ESPN and you're doing great work. Is there anything in your off television work, investments, business wise, that has happened recently that you have your eye on that you can share with us?
Well, I mean, I've been involved in a variety of different things. From an investor in a roll up company around insurance assets to wealth management. I've worked with a ton of different athletes. Obviously, I sit on the board of Aries for sports entertainment with a guy named Jim Miller and Mark Affolter, Michael Arrighetti, who is an absolute stud in this industry. Being around sports and being around owners, get a chance to spend time with people like Rick Schnall, who's owner of the Charlotte Hornets, or Joe and Clara Sy, owner of the Brooklyn Nets. Obviously, when KD went to the Nets, Matt Ishbia, Justin Ishbia is owner of the White Sox now. So I think you get a chance to see a lot of the private deal flow that's on the market, and you get a chance to see what athletes, what entertainers, aren't just investors, but they're seasoned in how they go about doing it. And I think we're at a very interesting time, Ben, where apparatuses are very siloed. And, what is the next iteration of that? So when athlete X decides to be an investor in an asset, how does that asset get diligenced? And sometimes, the change of that, I saw that with the boardroom and obviously working with Kevin Durant and Rich Kleiman as they launched 35 Ventures. And you've seen that, spent some time with Alexis Ohanian and how he's helped Serena and her whole VC side. It's an interesting frontier of media valuations continuing to go up with athletes that are now making $50, $60 million a year. I think I've been very passionate about how to transition from asset to principal and how to think more like principals, right? So even if that's being around a guy like Mark Lazary over at Avenue Capital, who is just a mastermind at debt financing, and seeing the way he goes about deals, or spending time with Alex Rodriguez and him talking about BCP and what he's been able to do with Mark Lore and obviously owning the Minnesota Timberwolves. There's a lot going on. I think we'll be making some announcements pretty soon about some things personally, what I'm doing and how I think you can combine media alongside with private deal flow in the financial services industry. And I'm pumped. I'm so much more passionate about that. I love talking about basketball. I love breaking down clips. But I think understanding where the puck is moving to in our industry, guys like Ndamukong Suh that I've known for a very long time, watching his relationship with Warren Buffett, watching his passion around real estate, seeing opportunities like SpaceX, like Anthropic, and being able to bring athletes, entertainers, and first-time founders to the table for those investments, but just not passive investors. How can you be active partners in the investment? I think is one of the most exciting times that we have in sports, considering that sports entertainment is a real asset class now that trillions of dollars are being poured into.
It's just keeps exploding and valuations keep going up, and you wonder if there will ever be a tipping point. People seem to think not yet. Staying on this kind of general topic, and I got a couple more for you. Investment in college sports is another, topic of super interest. You actually said to FOS a couple of years ago that you would be interested in buying a stake in Duke basketball. I think you said, you hope to one day own a 49% stake in Duke. And since that happened, there's been all this talk about private equity in college sports. There's been Otro Capital is investing in Utah. There's, been a conference level deal. Kind of what's your take on the overall state of this thing with private capital in college sports? And then I also want to make sure I nail you down on the Duke thing. Are you going to buy into Duke basketball?
I'll answer your first question. It's interesting. I still think there are a lot of gaps in the marketplace. Number one and foremost, guardrails need to be put down. It's hard due to the free agency nature each and every year within collegiate sports right now, obviously with some of these councils trying to figure out what the next steps are in those guardrails is extremely important. I think inevitable, players have to have a union, they have to have a voice, they have to have representation. And, when you create a nature, it's one of the reasons last night at the NBA draft, a team that just won the national championship in college basketball, their head coach, Dusty May, is now the head coach of the Dallas Mavericks alongside Masai Ujiri. I think you're going to see a lot more of that trend occur over the next several years due to how a lot of these college coaches are learning on the fly to operationalize a lot of their infrastructure and hiring a GM, how to raise capital. These are spigots that never really turn off, and they can't afford to turn off because there's no retention tools. Ben, if you're my player in year one, all of a sudden you have a 10% increase in your productivity. The next, now you're receiving 5x in the market. Like, that's just unheard of. So I think signing players to contracts, having buyout clauses, having buyout fees that should be paid by additional schools. I think guardrails are first and most important. One of the things I see at places like Duke or other places around the country are the opportunities to generate more revenue in certain assets. So I ask certain questions around, why do we still call it Cameron Indoor Stadium? How come there's no naming rights deal around Cameron Indoor
Yeah.
Stadium? How come it's not called Gillette Cameron Indoor Stadium for $25 million a year? Why do we have one sales team for tickets for both basketball and football? I think you're even seeing Duke basketball try to get smarter around their Amazon deal, right? And some of the loopholes and working with ESPN and Amazon for those 3 to 4 games. So I think you're seeing a lot more creativity in the marketplace. And I think what you're seeing from more traditional academic athletic directors, they're bringing in more professionalized deal people to act as, enhancers around how they should be thinking about operationalizing their infrastructure. And there's a ton of room of growth. And I think we are getting to that point where there's going to be a lot of change over the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, we're in this transitionary period, and college athletics needs to evolve. Some people are stuck in the past, others are trying to move to the future. You mentioned a few kind of specific ideas that you have with regard to like how programs can improve. Just to go back to the Duke thing, are you buying into Duke?
Let's just say there are certain brands in the sport that I think are legacy brands. Duke is one of them. Georgetown is. I think there are a lot of brands that are really interesting, that have a history, that have a legacy, that have storytelling around it. One of the interesting things about brands are, have you become adaptive in this market with storytelling as well? And I think, right now, one of those other gaps are, you see agencies working with players on team, bringing the player deals, right? And then the agencies are trying to work with the team on time and schedule, where it's inevitable. Why wouldn't you have your own creative studio inside of a program that then is able to work directly with the brand? You then charge a fee, and then you do the production, you do the creative that you think is the right storytelling around that individual and your team. So, like I said, I think there's a lot of gaps in the marketplace that are going to be changing very quickly. And I think my perch is a very interesting one, because I get a chance to spend a lot of time with NBA, NFL owners, and also athletic directors and coaches and players. So you get a chance to see it from a variety of different perspectives.
Yeah, so it sounds like maybe we'll be hearing some news on the Jay Williams front at a later date. The last question for you, and thanks again for your time. You were recently at the UFC White House event. Now, I saw your comments afterwards, that it was like this incredible event, which I'm sure that it was. A few other people who have been there, you mentioned Alexis Ohanian, comedian Shane Gillis, have been asked by people, about their attendance at the event. Obviously, President Trump can be a lightning rod. So I was just curious. I mean, it's been a few weeks since then. Did you hear any noise about you attending? Has your perspective changed at all? Or do you still feel, what a wonderful night?
What's crazy, Ben? Like, when you work in media, I think you recognize that you can't win every battle. And one of the things that always goes missing, which is why you try to do as much diligence on things before you speak about them, is context. So, for me, frankly, you can build a track record for a very long time for standing on principles that you believe in. And then in an instant, all those principles and that track record can be questioned. So let's start with context. Context, I was there for an hour and a half. I saw the undercard. Mark Shapiro is my agent. He's like a brother to me. Obviously, Aries and all the things they're doing over at TKO. Obviously, TKO owns UFC. They own WWE. Nick Khan, Dana White. Nick Khan used to work at CAA. These worlds are very intertwined. So, obviously, that's somebody that Mark, that I admire, that I've known for a while, his guest. I left early, spent a lot of time at the FBO, plane issues. Ended up, getting a great ride back from a friend. Couldn't land in New York, had to land in Trenton. Took an hour car ride at 3:30 in the morning to get up. Got to get up, did the show from 8 until 10, then went to do first take from 10 until noon. Stephen A made a comment about it. I made a quick comment about it. And then hours later, I found out that a fighter, post me not being there, made a comment about Michelle Obama. Now, I play golf with Barack Obama in the vineyard. Okay. I would never condone somebody calling Michelle Obama a man. Did not know about that. But the fact that people can try to tie that together and try to make me stand for that is appalling, frankly, and it's disgusting. If you want to debate me on a sports topic about the event not being good, fine. But to corral those two together to make them intertwined, I don't think that's okay. Am I going to go on an apology tour and try to come out and make a statement? It's interesting in my industry, when you're defensive, it makes you look guilty, right? So I think there's sometimes you just learn, I know what I stand for. I know what I fight daily in a lot of battles that people don't see behind the scenes on particular shows. And, there's delicacy that comes along with that. And so I think, when you get asked a question, obviously I'll deal with it directly. I'm not shying away from the question that you're asking, but I think context matters. And also, honestly, I think there's still, you learn, I'm 44 years old, turning 45. You learn, okay, like everything that Donald Trump does touch is a lightning rod, and people have a lot of harsh and real feelings. They're real about it. And sometimes it's like, if you show up someplace, you're complicit, even though I know the reality of what I stand for each and every single day, even though I know I wasn't around that camp. And, I do believe there is a world where you can say it was a once in a lifetime experience. I've never seen a fight outside the White House. Right.
Yeah.
At the same time, I don't agree with a lot of stances that politicians take. I don't agree with what he said about Michelle Obama, the fighter. And sometimes when you don't have a long time to explain all that, because nobody wants to pay attention to 2.5, 3 minutes of it, things can get lost. Learning experience.
We do our best here to allow for the context, so I appreciate you taking the time to engage on that. And I think the context is very helpful. A lot to look forward to. Night 2 of the NBA draft tonight. Obviously, people can catch you on ESPN every day. Thank you so much for joining this, and hopefully we'll talk again soon. Thanks, Jay.
You got it, Ben. Thanks.